Welcome to this webinar. Today we're going to be talking about how you use data and analytics to improve the adoption and usefulness of your employee portal. This webinar will be about 30 minutes. My name is Jazz and I'm a senior consultant at Habanero, part of the Toronto team, and a big focus area for me is user experience of the portal solutions that we build. And I've been working with SharePoint since 2003, and measurement and analytics has also been an area that I've been focused on. And in case you don't know Habanero, our purpose is to help people and organizations thrive. And we believe that technology has an important role in building thriving workplaces. And so our lines of business, our focus areas are employee portals and intranets, customer portals and websites, member portals and extranets. And today's webinar, I'm going to use examples and stories for employee portals. However, with some creativity and some thought, you can apply some of these ideas to your website or to your extranet as well. And the examples I'm going to show you are going to be from SharePoint and a couple of Yammer implementations. But again, if you're using a different platform, you can apply some of these principles to those other solutions you might be using. And so today's webinar, what we're going to cover in the next 30 minutes is we're going to talk a little bit about some technology options. I often get that question from clients, what are the different platforms or packages that we can use to gather data? So I thought I'd spend just a few minutes talking about those options. And then I'm going to go through a simple framework to start thinking about the right questions to ask in order to focus on the data that matters to you. And then I'll leave you with some inspiration and some examples that you can take away and start looking at your own employee portal and some of those insights that you can derive. So let's get started with some technology options. So usually when people think about data and analytics, they might think of reports or even dashboards. However, I think it's less about the technology because reports don't give you insights by themselves. It takes a bit of work and analysis to figure out what are those right questions you should be asking and what are those insights that I can gather from the data that's available. However, a good starting place is some of the options, the technology options that we have. And so I'm just going to go through the way that I think about it and the options that you can look at. So typically, if you're working with a platform like SharePoint or Yammer or SharePoint Online, you have some out-of-the-box reports. So I'll give you some examples of that. And then I'll get into a little bit about third-party add-ons that you have for those systems. And then there's this third option, this sort of custom or do-it-yourself model, which I'll just touch on really lightly as well. So the first one is out-of-the-box. And I'll start by going back a little bit in time. Let's start with SharePoint 2007 and 2010. There were some basic out-of-the-box reports and data that were included with those packages. So you could get information about visits, so where people were going, basic user information, the sort of the top users. You can get information about the browsers and the operating systems that people might be using. And there was some very limited information about items. And by items, I mean things like documents, pages, list items, even web parts. And then a big sort of differentiator between 2010 and 2007 with the analytics piece was the search reports. 2010 had some better information about top queries that people were entering into the search engine, where people were abandoning their search, and where people were actually clicking through, those most click-through results as well. However, when 2013 was released, it was actually a bit shocking. There were fewer out-of-the-box reports included in the platform. A couple of things, though, that were a bit different. Item usage got a little bit better in 2013, and that helps with things like being able to report on the most popular documents, the most popular pages, and that sort of thing. As well, the search logs were enriched a little bit. There was more information about the promoted results, as well as query rule usage and that kind of thing. So in some areas it got a little better, but overall it got a little worse. And the experience of actually looking at reports on SharePoint 2013 on premise is actually pretty bad. You have to download these Excel files, so it's not even a web experience. You click on a link, it opens that Excel file, and then you get these really basic reports. And so you see visits or views by day and by month. And it's a little hard to build comparisons over time, and I find that this information is pretty limited in its usefulness. What's even harder sometimes, and we see this now more and more, is that our clients are moving towards not just having an employee portal, a traditional employee portal or intranet, but also having more of a social network as well, which involves sort of two-way discussions, sharing ideas, and more about collaborating out in the open. And this can make getting insights a bit more challenging. So, how do you get information if you have a different system for your social network? And I'm going to use Yammer as an example. So if you haven't seen Yammer before, it's a platform that allows you to have those discussions within your organization and allow people to sort of comment and share ideas. And this is the admin screen where you can see a basic dashboard about the activity that's happening in your social network. And Yammer, out of the box, it's okay. It has some information about, from the past 7 days or the past 28 days, how the network has grown. So you can see there's some likes, there's members being added, how many more messages there are. So there's some basic stuff in there. They also try to roll up this concept of engagement. So 78 members there were engaged. And that, the way Yammer defines it, it's all about having a deliberate action. So if somebody likes something, if they post something, if they share something, that all rolls up into that engagement measure. However, there are some limitations here. Out of the box, if you're just looking at this web dashboard, you can only go back in a 7-day time period or a 28-day time period. So you can't necessarily go back, say, past 3 months or past 6 months, which our clients often want to understand sort of a longer trend over time. And then I find that the measures are actually pretty basic. So what? There's a few hundred messages. What does that really mean? What is the quality of those messages? So there's more insight that we can get using another system. And so what we find with out of the box is that the reports are typically not good enough, and our clients want more information from the data and analytics. So then we turn to third-party solutions, and a vast majority of our clients have some other web analytics tool that they might be using. And we see these ones. So here I put Google Analytics, Web Trends, and Adobe. We see our clients using these for their website. So their web team might already have an analytics package that they're already familiar with. And these options, they can extend to your employee portal as well with some configuration and setup. However, if you're really looking at an analytics platform that's made for websites, it might have more emphasis on things like conversions, goals, and transactions, which might not be everything that you need to know about your employee portal. You might be missing information by user, by location, by department, or looking at SharePoint concepts like web parts, etc., how people are using different SharePoint pieces, because these solutions don't necessarily out of the box support digging into data that way. However, there is sort of a happy medium here. Web Trends has a SharePoint-specific offering as well, and we see this most commonly at our client sites using Web Trends, and Microsoft has mentioned it as one of their only preferred analytics partners as well. However, there are other options. Again, it's a pretty rich ecosystem. I've just listed a couple of other options that you could look at here. I don't get referrals on this. I'm just pointing out that there are other solutions that you should look into based on what you're needing out of your data and analytics platform. So the final sort of technology option, the final bucket here is DIY or do-it-yourself mode. And I don't actually recommend this. This is the more custom option. But we have seen people, and in some scenarios, you might want to get right to the server logs or use PowerShell from your SharePoint platform to actually export data. And you can put that data into different formats. You can put it into Excel. You can use Power BI tools in there to kind of report and slice and dice that information. You can also put it into a custom database and use SQL Server reporting services as well. This tends to be the more custom approach, though, the more heavy-handed one. So I don't recommend going down this path unless it's something really specific you need that a third-party option doesn't provide. So the next section I'm going to go through here is how to ask the right questions and how to build a framework for measurement, because really it's not necessarily just about the technology. It's not just about those reports and those options. It's about framing those right questions that you need to answer. And so I really like this quote by Charles Kettering. He's a former inventor and head of research at GM. And he says, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." So it's all about figuring out what are those questions, what are those problems that you need to solve, and where are you going to change what you're doing on your portal based on data. And so a framework to get started is very simple. I sort of am a pragmatic person, so I like to take a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And so the top-down starts with looking at your objectives and goals. And you should already have some objectives and goals set up for your employee portal. If you don't, it's probably a good place to start, is to figure out what are you trying to achieve. What are the, say, 2 or 3 or 4 top priorities for your portal? It could be everything from increasing employee loyalty, improving customer service, improving efficiency, reducing silos across your organization, building more consistent communication, whatever that is, make sure you're clear on those top priorities. And then you want to look at what metrics and what reports you have available to you. And a metric, really very simply, it's a number. So it's usually a count or a ratio. It could be a column that you have available in your reports, in your analytics package. And so you want to get a good understanding of the metrics that you have and where you might want to focus on, or where those metrics are that map to your top priorities. And then you kind of build a plan together, and that's where you start to figure out what are those rich key performance indicators or KPIs and those things that you need to focus on. And with that, pair that with setting targets as well. And it's okay if you don't know what your target is right out of the gate, or you're not confident it's the right one. They can change over time. But just start to set some stakes in the ground with pairing your objectives and goals with your metrics and coming up with that list of KPIs. So I'll just give you an example to help illustrate this a little bit more. It doesn't have to be complicated. I'm going to pick a basic example here. We often see with the employee portals that we build that having engaging company communications and making it effective, making sure people are informed, is a business objective of the portal. And you might have sort of associated sub-goals with that. So you're doing this because you want to have an employee community that's informed. Maybe you also want to just build some connections between employees, say within different regions or offices. And then I like to just, as a reminder, list some of the associated features or functionality in the portal that supports the goals. So things like targeted news and alerts, having events for people to sign up for, that can help really inform people. For stronger employee connections, you might have information about people, because we know people like people. They like to see what's happening out there. So having a little area dedicated towards people news. Maybe you also are supporting contributions, things like comments or discussions, or allowing people to share ideas. And then what I like to do is start to brainstorm different KPIs, different things that we could measure to, at a glance, know if we are successful in meeting our goals. And at this point, it's a brainstorming phase, so you want to ideally do this with your portal team or your steering committee, and just come up with some KPIs. And they might not be easy to measure right out of the gate. That's okay. Just come up with that list of possible things that you might be interested in. So for things like an informed employee community, maybe you're really interested in understanding how often people are coming back to that news area, so that news loyalty concept. Maybe you have an email problem and you want to help reduce that. Maybe you also want to just measure sort of transactions or people doing things like signing up for events. With employee connections, maybe you want to also measure loyalty or interest in people news. Are people really interested in it? Find out. Maybe you also want to look at the rate of contribution, so how often people are commenting or starting a thread or replying to a thread and that kind of thing. So good measures, they're not easy to come by and they take a bit of work, but these are some characteristics of good measures. They are strategic, ideally, and they speak to the purpose of your team or your organization. They should be stated from the employee or customer perspective, and they should also make performance obvious, whether that's good or bad, so you can tell at a glance how you're doing. Okay, to give you a sense of what good measures are, and I'll give you a couple of examples and I'll compare what I think of sort of basic or lame measures with some better ones. So ones that I see people focused on are things like visits and views, the top search queries, or looking at what people are liking, what people are following. But better measures, ones that I think are more awesome, are ones that relate more to, say, loyalty, which is about the long-term relationship that people might have with your portal. So how many times do they go to different sections? How often do they visit? What is their length, the time that they're spending? Are they accomplishing the tasks they need to do? With search, beyond just looking at top queries, I like to look at how successful are people at finding what they're looking for. How effective are your top search results, especially those top 5 results that appear on a search result page. Those ones are a good indicator of how effective your search engine really is. I also like to look at engagement, which is more than just liking or following things. It's about the quality of the conversation, the sentiment. Is it positive or negative? Are people recognizing each other, collaborating, working together? So those kinds of things tend to drive more insight than some of those basic measures. And so I'll go through different examples to help illustrate what loyalty, search effectiveness, and engagement could look like if you're actually looking at an employee portal and looking at some of the data that you're going to get out of it. So let's start with loyalty. So loyalty is all about a few different areas, and so one of the areas that I like to look at is frequency, and this is how often your audience visits over a certain time period. And so if you look at, say, a week or a month, how often are people coming back? And that's what this simple report is showing you here. So it's telling you count of sessions or visits. In this case, Google Analytics calls this sessions. And so if you look at a month or a week, you might have a goal that people come back once or twice a week. And so then you want to have, over that time period, you want to measure how often, what is that rate of people coming back that often? And so you can see in this case, it's actually pretty poor. This is a period over a week. Most of the people are just coming back once, which is not ideal. If you're updating your portal, say your news section, a couple times a week, you want people to at least come back that often. And just a tip, if you have your employee portal set as the browser default, so that means when somebody opens up their browser, they automatically hit your employee portal. You don't necessarily want to count all of those visits or all of those sessions in this type of report. So what I like to do is use filters if you can, and maybe filter out visits that are, say, less than 2 or 3 seconds, because that's a good indicator somebody just opened the browser and they just wanted to go somewhere else. So another thing that I like to look at under loyalty is recency, and it's similar to frequency, and it tells you the days between visits or days between their last session. And so a very simple report, again, you can see how many days it's been, and you can kind of get that distribution. And you can look at this as well by defining targets. So this is where that concept of targets come into play. And in this case, I've defined here highly engaged people as there's 1 day or less between visits, somewhat engaged people 2 to 7 days, and people that are not engaged or not loyal to your site as 7+ days. And so you can start to build comparisons, say month over month, so you can see how your loyalty or how your engagement is changing over time based on this very simplistic measure of sort of days between sessions. The next one I'll leave you with here is duration and depth, and this is about sort of time and quality, and it can give you a good sense of, for different areas of your portal, how long people spend and how deep they go. And I like this for only certain areas of your portal, so it might not apply to everything. You might have a home page or some other place where you want people to have a high bounce rate, so they're not spending a long time. They're actually finding what they need and they're getting on with their work. But in other areas like a knowledge base or how do I, or maybe an onboarding section, you want people to spend a bit more time, and a highly engaged visit or a loyal visit would be usually around that 60-second mark because people are learning or they're trying to discover something. So in this case, again, you can look at duration, how long people are staying in certain areas, and get that distribution. And be careful if you're looking at a metric like average time on site. That's usually a very common one that's provided on a lot of dashboards, is looking at the average. That can hide some harsh realities, I find, especially if your distribution is like this, where you have a lot of people that are sort of under, say, 10 seconds, and then you have very few people, and then maybe you have another bump of people who are spending quite a long time on the page. And you might have a good average time on site, but it could be hiding some realities like this, where most people are not spending a long time. So look at that distribution if you have access to it. Depth is another one. So this is how deep people go in your site. So do they click, or in that particular area, do they click and actually discover other places or other things? And again, this doesn't apply to all parts of your portal. It should, typically apply to things like a knowledge base or an area focused more on learning. And if you want to get more advanced, you can also look at, again, setting targets or conversions. So you can start to measure how far or how long you want people to be spending in your portal. And so what do you actually do with this information? So I believe in measuring things that you actually take action or you make a change to your system. So different things that you could do is look at your content. So if people are not visiting, or they're not spending a long time, or they're not maybe going deep as you would expect them to, look at if your content is effective. Is it redundant, outdated, or trivial? And work with your content authors to update that so it becomes more engaging and becomes more useful. You can also look at adding links or other things if people are not getting that page depth that you expect. As well, you can communicate that value. So it might be something that people just don't know what they don't know. They don't realize that there's some important information in your portal, and so maybe a communication plan is something that needs to get out there. Okay, the next example of measures that I find really effective, I'm going to talk about search and search effectiveness. And the reason why is that almost on every project I work on, I hear this or something like this, where people don't like the search engine, it doesn't work, and they wish it could just work like Google. Almost everyone says that. And so I'm going to share a story. It's kind of, it's one of my favorite ones. It's from Van City Credit Union, and they have a number of branches spread out through the Lower Mainland and Vancouver area. And they have staff who are really connected to the community. They want to serve their members effectively. And so when we started working with them a few years ago, one of the areas that we heard about was search and people not being able to find the information they need in order to serve their customers or serve their members effectively. And so what we did before we looked at redesigning the portal or redesigning the navigation or doing anything, we got some analytics, some information from their existing portal. And one of those simple reports was the top query report. And so that you can see very simply, here's the queries, the number of times it occurred. With this, it would be another way that you can enhance this, or if you're advanced and you have access to this information, you can also add columns for the number of click-throughs per query, because that shows that that query and that result set is effective and might be working, or maybe it doesn't if the number of click-throughs is low. You can also add on the number of search results returned per query. And the reason why I like to look at that is I like to get a sense of are there tens or hundreds or thousands of search results coming back for particular queries, because again, that can indicate that your content might have a problem or your search engine might need tuning. For fun, for the top queries, I also like to just put it into this tool called Wordle. I find it just helps you bring out a few terms that might be lower down the list, or if you're not a fan of Excel, this can be a bit more of a fun way to look at your data. But you want to look at, when you're looking at your search logs, what are people searching for? When they complete a search, what are they clicking on? Where they are abandoning their search, so that means they type something in and they don't click on anything. And what I always recommend to portal teams is to take that top 50 or the top 100 queries and actually type them in your search engine and look at what results are appearing, especially on that first page, because that can start to give you a sense of how effective your search engine is. And what we find with search is that it's such a common tool, and it's funny because you think people don't trust search, so they won't use it, but people still do. And improving a search experience can really have an increase in user satisfaction. So it's an area, if anything else, if you can't focus on any other analytics, this is one that I think has the most power to improve your portal. And so I'll go back to the Van City example. Before we redesigned their portal, the portal team was great. They looked at the content, they reduced the volume of content, they updated content, and they also added best bets. So this is SharePoint 2010 is called best bets. Now it's called promoted results, but they added that information in for those top queries so people could get to that right section. And what they also did was added this feedback tool here on the right hand side, where people can rate the quality of this search experience for each query they type in. And this is a great way to pair your sort of data and analytics reporting with some user feedback. And it can help give you insight into why people are looking for certain things or what they expect to find, so that you can improve your search engine that way too. And so what you do when you're on a search, when you're looking at your search data, is that you respond to any search feedback. So if you are going to add a feedback tool, make sure you have people available that are able to respond to that feedback. Create promoted results, especially if your search results are not showing the most relevant results on that first page. You want to drive people to the right section by adding in best bets or promoted results. You can use synonyms or your thesaurus to drive people to the right terms if they're typing in something and your content is not matching the terms that people are typing in. You can also share these analytics and all of this stuff, the loyalty, the search effectiveness, and engagement metrics with your content owners too, because they can help improve that content, identify those content gaps. So with Van City, once the portal was redesigned, there was a new navigation, a new information architecture, a search also had to be revisited. So improving search effectiveness does not end once you launch your portal or once you redesign your portal. It's something that's an ongoing effort, especially as your content changes, as your business changes, as you're updating things. You want to continually monitor search to make sure people can find what they're looking for. So you can see here, even in that redesigned portal, for the top terms, we still had to add in those best bets and promoted results, and they still have that feedback tool as well to keep improving search over the long haul. So the last measure that I want to share with you or give you an example of is engagement. How do you actually measure engagement? It can be a big concept. And so there's a number of things based on your own organization, what engagement could mean to you. You can see here some ideas here. One area that I'm just going to focus on is recognition, because studies show that when people are recognized at work, they tend to be more committed, more engaged, and kind of go that extra mile as well. And so recognition is a big part of employee engagement. And so in social network tools like Yammer, they often might have ways to recognize people. And so you can see this on this page here. Michael is praising Victor. Kudos for Victor, wrapping his head around scanning OCR and SciGen. And so this is just a nice way to recognize employees kind of more on a peer-to-peer level. And we can use this information, and at Habanero, recognition is a big part of our culture. And so when I export the data from Yammer, so you don't have to just use the dashboards that are out of the box, you can actually export that data and put it into another tool like Excel. And so that's what this is here. It's a very crude export. What it's doing here is it's showing you the top tags or topics, and you can see kudos, which that's kind of the vernacular that we use here at Habanero for recognizing people. It's by far the top tag or mention. So it's kind of nice to see that related to engagement, kudos is a very strong correlation there. And as well, you can see people who are mentioned as well. And so I would love to take this to the next level and really just focus on the praise functionality, and are people using it? How is that engagement changing over time? But there's a lot more to do, I think, in this social insights area, and a lot more to discover. And so you can also look at things like, so beyond just recognition, I think you can look at sentiment, so overall positive and negative comments, how is that changing over time? You could look at who starts threads, so the rate of people starting a thread, that tends to indicate higher engagement than people just replying. As well, time to reply. So if people are on a very active or engaged type network, the time to reply is very small because people are jumping in, they're sharing ideas, or collaborating, and they're working really effectively together in a really timely manner. So that's another way to look at engagement. So I think there's a lot more to do here. I think you can go beyond just the basic dashboards that are provided and really start to export the data and start to slice and dice it in a way that you're measuring engagement that really matters to your organization. And so when you're looking at engagement, some of the things that you can actually take action on and do differently in your social network or your portal, I think you can look at your communication rate. So if people are not engaged and they're not necessarily looking at the platform that much, it could be because you have too little communication, or maybe you have so much that it's overwhelming, people just don't know where to start, and you need a better way to prioritize or curate that information. You could also look at who are your influencers, your top contributors, because they can really be your champions, and it's important to keep them engaged, especially if you're rolling out different communication or different programs. Having that list of people can be really helpful. As well, you can start to identify subject matter experts, and they are not necessarily your influencers or the people that are contributing the most, but they're the ones that can start threads, they have insight, they reply to really sort of complicated ideas. And so these people are a great resource to involve when there's conversations that are happening that are not getting answered. So if you want to look at your unanswered threads, that's another way to figure out what your engagement level is, and then connect people to help respond to those threads. Finally, as well, what I like to do is just look at what's working for teams or groups that are high performing, because some teams just get it. Maybe they just have a good business goal, they have the right members, they've got the proper training. Look at all of the things that are really working, and then start to replicate that across your entire network. So create that support network, create checklists, best practices, etc., so that you have these virtual teams that become really high performing. Okay, just to wrap up, we'll go through my final takeaways for you here. So data, it's really great, but it can inform, but it can't necessarily make decisions for you. So I really believe to focus on the things that are actually going to inspire a change in your behavior, or a way for you to make updates to your portal. Otherwise, it's not really worth tracking that. And so you want to measure what matters. It's okay to be specific and focus on a limited set of data. It doesn't have to be everything, and hopefully you've gotten some examples and some inspiration today from loyalty, from looking at search effectiveness, even business impact or task completion, and looking at things like engagement. And at the end of the day, analytics are great. They tell you a lot. They tell you what users are doing. but they don't always tell you why. So analytics are just part of a program that really should include other types of feedback. So things like getting feedback through search, or sitting down with people, observing how they're using the portal, going through interviews, and involving your portal in sort of a holistic manner. So if you're really interested in analytics and you want to learn more, here's just a few references. There's a good book called Prove It, which really speaks to some of the SharePoint options and SharePoint adoption. There's a website by Avinash, which is more website related, but I find it has really helpful concepts for helping think about analytics as a whole. And if you're really into search, there's a good book out there called Search Analytics for Your Site. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. You can reach me through email or on Twitter, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone that's interested. Thank you.